Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 130, and we're going to talk about the Swiss president or the president of Switzerland, some government regulations, unintended consequences, perhaps, and we'll get into some examples. Okay, so first of all, I'm sure you have already heard some comments about the debate. As I was watching a James Bond movie last night, my wife kept updating me on some of the more ridiculous things that were happening in the debate. But then today I listened, well, not only on X, where there are a lot of people making comments and uploading clips, but also I listened to some, very brief analysis, at least takeaways from the debate. I listened, of course, to Ron Paul's Liberty Report. He was off today. And so Daniel McAdams was talking with Chris Rossini, and they had some pretty interesting comments to make, as well as the Radio Rothbard podcast with Tho Bishop and Ryan McMakin. Both of them are very, very good. And also had some really good twists, interpretations, takeaways of the debate. It is interesting how a lot of people were really surprised about the state of President Biden. And what I thought was kind of very interesting was how there was no sort of mea culpa, right? No one said, oh, I guess we got it wrong. Leading up to debate, everyone was saying how lucid he was and how together he was. And all of a sudden, this horrible train wreck of a debate, which was kind of, I wouldn't have been able to watch it anyway. When I see someone struggling like that, it's not something that I could sit through and watch. It's just so horrifying. But it is interesting that so many people were surprised, as if they never knew the state of Biden. That's kind of interesting, which should make people wonder who's in charge and why are we funding all of these things that we're funding? Because clearly there's no single person, single entity that is calling all of the shots. In fact, it's probably what I probably said earlier, a whole bunch of people taking advantage of the fact that Biden is simply not in control and pushing through all of the things that they want. Uh, let's see, I think the Radio Rothbard talked about this, how they compared Biden with this old grandfather, and all of the grandkids are taking advantage of him, so they can raid the liquor cabinet and, do all these other horrible things. So they're taking advantage of him. And so, isn't it the case that Biden is that doddering old grandfather and all the grandkids are playing Harry and just getting into all kinds of trouble with the country? But of course, the rest of us have to suffer as a result. And then there's the whole rise of conspiracy theories, like how did the handlers of Biden, agree to this? How did they come to the decision that this would be a good idea? And then why did they do it so early? You see all of these conspiracy theories now that are popping up about the replacement of Biden. So nonstop thrills and chills and excitement. It is extremely embarrassing for the United States, because that everyone all over the world is watching this, and just how absolutely horrifying this is. I tell you though, I haven't seen at least the people that I've watched, not a lot of people have talked about all of the people whose families, the survivors of the people who have been killed because of all of these wars and these conflicts that we're funding all over the world. It's horrifying. I mean, it's just beyond comprehension. So why did they die? What was the purpose of all of this? And the big takeaway, anyway, is that government has too much power, right? The reason why so many people would think about tuning in to watch such a ridiculous display of ignorance is that there's too much power in the American government, which is why I think that the United States should be more like Switzerland. One of the questions that I would always ask my class, because, invariably someone would always say, we need a strong government, right? Why do you need a strong government? Oh, to protect us from our enemies. Okay. So then I asked them, Switzerland has been neutral and, people, at least to my knowledge, I haven't heard anyone try to invade Switzerland. So who's their president, right? People aren't invading because they must have a strong government, like you just, right? So that the argument has been made. No one knows the name of the Swiss president. And so I tell them that there are 7 Swiss presidents, and it's kind of like this committee kind of thing. And I believe that it has something to do with the fact that they have cantons or states, perhaps you might be able to compare it to. And so each canton has a president, and they get together and they try to write regulations. And most of the people in Switzerland are generally opposed to certain kinds of regulations. And so, therefore, a lot of people are not really so concerned about the politics in that country. In other words, the power of the government is so reduced that most people don't really have to know exactly what's going to happen, tune into the debates to see how they need to prepare for the future. Now, if the United States was like that, where the government was extremely weak, and so no one really cared what they decided or who even was president, wouldn't that be awesome? Because then we can just simply go about living our lives unhindered, unbothered by the state. And you might say, oh, but I think that we need some government. Well, recently I've been with the church, I've been, now that it's the summer, I've been trying to catch up with a lot of the maintenance aspects that need to be taken care of the church. In other words, I could see that, inflation is going to really hit us. And so I figure we need to try to repair as much as we can before inflation gets really crazy, right? And so yeah, there are a lot of other considerations to be made, but just so you know, I'm just trying to figure out how much we can repair at the lowest cost. Our church is, you know, once upon a time was quite large, but because of competition, we have a very small congregation. And so I need to be really, really frugal with our expenses. And this is also the major reason why I teach on the side, right? Because the church can't afford to pay me what a lot of my competitors are offering their senior pastors. And so in order to, reduce that need, but also to try to feed my family, I took on another job. Okay, so one of the things a problem that we encountered was air conditioning and heating. Now, most units are separate, especially when our church was built. The air conditioning and the heating units for the sanctuary are separate machines, right? Separate units. They both plug into the blower, I think that's what it's called, where it pushes the air into the sanctuary, but the heating and the air conditioning are different. And so our air conditioning unit went kaplooey, and so just like it always does. And so I called up a repair person to take a look at it, and he said that it's an old unit, right? It was first turned on in 1987. And so it was using R22 refrigerant. And so for the purpose of this video, I looked up the history of air conditioning, and it turns out that R22 became industry standard for air conditioning in 1968 to 1972. It became the standard. More and more people just would use R22 as the refrigerant in the air conditioning units, and it was relatively cheap, I guess, and it did a really great job. And then came 1992, the Montreal Protocol. And there they decided that R22 would be phased out by the year 2000. Okay. And so by the year 2000, you cannot sell, I guess, or produce R22 anymore. And so you might say, why not? It's because of the ozone scare, right? Because of, certain chemicals, it's depleting the ozone, which would lead to, you know, uh, human beings and the planet being more exposed to ultraviolet light or something like that. And so cancer is going to go through the roof and whatnot. And I remember that. Everyone going crazy about the ozone. They would show you virtual images of ozone where it's disappearing. And pretty soon, if we don't do something about it, there will be no more ozone. Well, all of that is, of course, climate change type propaganda. And so the whole ozone thing is also, none of us are dying of radiation now because we're exposed to, more ultraviolet light. In other words, even though R22 was phased out, other countries obviously are going to be using R22. And so there's no real decrease in the use of that chemical, and other ones that probably also negatively affect the ozone. And so I heard recently that there's no ozone left, but no one really cares anymore, right? No one talks about the ozone any longer. So since R22 was going to be phased out, they came up with R410A in 1994, a couple of years later. And so obviously, if you use this new refrigerant, you can't put it in the old units, or at least I was told, but now I'm being told by this guy, someone who's looking at it now, that you could sort of put it into the old unit, right? It's if you do some kind of modification, whatever. I haven't gotten that far yet, but in any case, so now new machines are purposed to use R410A. Now, understand that to upgrade the unit to use R410A, it would take the place of air conditioning and heating. It is in the ballpark of $80,000, which is a massive expense for us. And here you see the results of regulations, right? So this is the point that I'm trying to make. Because you have a meddling government who are going to try to latch on to certain trendy propaganda, scaremongering, you impose costs on small businesses, right? And I've mentioned before that churches are kind of business, right? They need to have income and they have expenses, right? So it's a tax exempt organization. But for us, we're a small church with kind of like a fixed income, right? So for us, this is a huge expense. And, luckily, the church has some savings. So if push came to shove, I mean, we'd have to bite the bullet and try to do something. But for now, we're going without air conditioning, right? We're all meeting in the basement, um, just so we can avoid having to have to repair and replace the air conditioner. And so that's kind of the situation that we're in. But regulations, and because R22 is no longer available, we have to buy a whole new system. We can't just simply repair the old system, which is just absolutely insane. Also, the price of R22, right? Because it's phased out, and you have some guys that are hoarding it, saving it, for just this kind of occasion. They're selling it for like $20 per pound, and the unit that we have takes 70 pounds of that coolant, of that refrigerant. And so that's a lot of money. Okay, right? 70 times $20. But in any case, so it's a hardship. It's a burden. And so what you see is that people are now catching on to this idea of, okay, well, it gets upgraded, and so now we get to sell all these replacement units. There's a lot of labor charge, and so they can make a lot of money that way. But why not do it in such a way that we can still use the old systems, right? Have competing systems, have new units use the R410A, and still service the R22s. Why not do that? Why not let the free market decide how the transition is going to happen instead of this government mandated kind of timeline? And it's that mandate where it doesn't matter what is convenient. It doesn't matter what makes the most sense. It doesn't matter what is most cost effective. It's just they decide, hey, look, and by this time, you're not allowed to use this substance any longer. And so it forces everyone to have to, shell out a lot of money to comply with new regulations, right? So it's a very, very big strain on lower income families, small businesses. It's just very, very difficult to keep up with all those regulations. And I got to tell you that they nickel and dime you to death, right? And there are all these different inspections that you have to go through. Okay, safety. Okay, fine, I get it, but it's just all mandated. Another example is digital TVs. So you went from regular broadcast TV to digital. Now, I never wanted that. I didn't request it, but because of resolutions and all this other kind of stuff, it was phased out. It was mandated to be phased out, which meant that all these TVs that people had bought, they're no longer usable. You needed to buy converters, which never really worked that well. And so we had to buy all these new TVs. Now, you know, digital flat screen TVs, right? They became pretty inexpensive over a relatively short period of time. You didn't have to mandate anything. People would have naturally switched over once they saw that the price of these new TVs were going down so much. And so people would have ditched those old TVs voluntarily. You didn't need to force everyone to do it early. I mean, my parents, just as an example, my father passed away a couple of years ago, but while he was still alive, he had a hard time trying to learn. He was, in his upper 80s, and he had a hard time trying to learn the new system. And he just ended, I couldn't even figure it out, honestly. Since I didn't watch the news anymore, I didn't really care, but he was trying to get his old channels. And I honestly, I didn't know how to do that. I probably didn't care enough to try to figure it out. And so basically, he lost that connection with the world to be able to watch all the old local broadcast news. I tried to set up the digital system for him, but it just didn't work out well. And so when you mandate things, you inconvenience a lot of people. You put all these extra expenses on them, and it's not convenient. But in a voluntary system, people can have and still use the old system. And everyone who wants to ditch that old system and use the new system, well, they can do that as well. Okay. It's like computers, if you want to use the old systems, fine. There's no legal reason, there's no limit or restriction of access. You can still use your old system, but if you want, you can upgrade to a newer system as well. All right, but that's it. So government has too much power, and all these regulatory agencies are unelected, and yet they write all these new rules and regulations for us that we have to follow. All of this has a cost. It's extremely expensive, and the quality of life, our standard of living, goes down as a result. All right, I'll talk to you guys on Sunday for my regular sermon episode, and then I'll see you next week.